You are standing on the Illinois River in 2009, watching a commercial fishing boat haul in its nets. The catch weighs 40 tons. 97% of it is Asian carp. Native fish, the ones sport fishermen came for, are nearly gone. The government has now spent $607 million trying to kill these fish. $607 million. And the carp are still winning. I have spent the last 20 years watching this happen, studying what works and what does not. My father taught me to ask one question first. What is the system actually telling you? Here is what the Illinois River is telling us right now. In the 1970s, fish farmers in Arkansas imported Asian carp to control algae in their ponds. Silver carp, bighead carp, black carp, grass carp. 4 species, all from Asia, all hungry. The farms flooded. The carp escaped into the Mississippi River system. They reproduced. A single female can lay over 1 million eggs per spawning season. They consumed up to 40% of their body weight in plankton every single day. Within 30 years, they had collapsed the food web that native fish depend on. By 2009, in stretches of the Illinois River, carp were 97% of all fish biomass. 97%. Nearly everything else was gone. The Army Corps of Engineers built electric barriers to stop them reaching Lake Michigan. 3 barriers now stand in the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal. But in 2009, scientists found Asian carp DNA in Lake Michigan itself, closer and closer to the Great Lakes, the 5 lakes that supply drinking water to 40 million people. The sport and commercial fishing industry across all 5 lakes is worth $7 billion a year. And that is when the government shifted into overdrive. Electrofishing surveys, commercial harvesting, rotenone poisoning in isolated ponds, underwater speakers playing distress calls, pheromone research, all of it costing money, hundreds of millions of dollars, all of it failing to control or reduce the carp populations. And here is where it gets interesting, because while federal agencies were spending their way to failure, 3 native species had already begun solving the problem themselves. Stay with me, because by the end of this chapter, you will know exactly how nature had the answer the whole time. The answer the government spent $607 million trying to buy. So, the government spent $607 million, and the carp kept winning. And here is where most people stop looking. But I have watched long enough to know that ecology does not wait for a federal budget. While those barriers were being built, 3 native fish were already in the water, doing the job. You have never heard of them. That is the whole problem. The alligator gar, the bowfin, the American paddlefish, these were the suppressors. All 3 were common in the Mississippi Basin before the 20th century arrived. Then we decided they were trash. Literally. State agencies ran bounty programs to kill them, electrofished them out, destroyed their habitat with dams. The gar was targeted for eradication. Agencies believed it ate sport fish, though evidence never supported it. By 1950, alligator gar had vanished from Illinois, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee entirely. Bowfin and paddlefish followed the same path into invisibility. We removed the native predators, and the system lost its natural resistance. This is called ecological release. The invader thrives because its enemies are gone. In the Trinity River in Texas, where gar populations survived relatively intact, Asian carp never established. In the Illinois River, where we had erased the gar decades earlier, carp exploded. Now let me be direct about this. Nobody was secretly hiding these fish from you. The research linking native predators to carp suppression began appearing in the 2000s. But by then, the infrastructure money was already flowing toward electric barriers and poison. Alligator gar take 10 years to reproduce. Their recovery is measured in decades, not quarters. An engineering solution promised immediate action. Ecological restoration promised patience. Bureaucracies chose the one that looked fastest on a budget timeline. Paddlefish had their own invisible problem. Dams blocked their spawning migrations, and overfishing had gutted their numbers. These three fish were not unknown to the ecosystem. They were unknown to the agencies funding the solution. And this is where the real story turns, because I need to show you exactly what these three were capable of doing if we had just let them work. So, the native fish were there all along, quietly suppressed by the very system meant to control carp. Let me show you what these three species actually do in the water when a carp spawns. The paddlefish is the ancient hunter here, 300 million years of lineage in North American rivers. You are standing in current where a female carp has just drifted eggs downstream, semi-buoyant, suspended. Those eggs are 1 to 2 millimeters across, drifting for 3 to 5 days before they hatch. The paddlefish glides through with its paddle-shaped rostrum held forward, reading the water by electroreception. It filters everything in its path: zooplankton, organic drift, and carp eggs that fall within its feeding window. I have spent years studying gut content from paddlefish, and the evidence is unmistakable. When I find larval carp in their stomachs, I am looking at suppression happening in real time. Now, the bigmouth buffalo. This is where the story gets deeper than most people know. A bigmouth buffalo I examined was verified at over 100 years old using radiocarbon dating. 100 years means it has fed through multiple carp invasion decades, filtering the same water. Bigmouth buffalo are filter feeders consuming zooplankton, the exact food that starves juvenile carp. They are not hunting the eggs directly, but they are starving the competition. Then there is the blue catfish, the opportunistic predator that takes juvenile carp directly in its teeth. Blue catfish stomach analyses show carp remains, evidence of hunting, not accident. These three fish represent something the government never funded: predation that costs nothing to maintain. And here is where it gets interesting, because the recovery window is closing. The paddlefish, depleted by overfishing for caviar and dams that block spawning, is rare now in many systems. Bigmouth buffalo, once commercially harvested as rough fish, were treated as trash to be eradicated. Blue catfish remain more abundant, but all three have been systematically removed from the places that need them most. The question becomes not whether they work, but whether we will rebuild them in time to use them. So, we have three native fish that were doing the job all along, while the government spent $500 million on the opposite solution. Let me show you the real numbers, because here is where it gets sharp. In 2009, when rotenone poison killed everything in a stretch of the Illinois River, the federal cost per carp removed was roughly $2,300. $2,300 to kill one fish that was already being hunted naturally somewhere else. Now remember, alligator gar eat carp eggs by the thousands in their breeding season. Paddlefish filter juvenile carp from the water column as they feed. Blue catfish hunt them in the dark. The cost of letting those 3 fish do it: $0. Nothing. Free. The ecosystem had already written the solution. And here is the part that changed how I understand invasive management entirely. The barriers in Chicago cost tens of millions to operate each year, and carp were still reaching Lake Michigan. The rotenone poisoning killed the invasive species, but also killed the native fish trying to suppress them. We were bombing the field to stop the invaders and accidentally striking our own allies. Meanwhile, in Texas and Arkansas, where alligator gar populations remained less depleted, carp establishment was lower. That is not coincidence. That is trophic cascade, the word ecologists use for what happens when you leave the predators alone. I have to tell you what I learned, standing on the Illinois River, watching $2 million worth of electrofishing equipment idle in 2015. The most expensive solution fails. The free one works, and we had already eliminated it decades earlier through bounty programs and eradication. We spent the money, not because it was effective, but because the money was budgeted and the native restoration was not. So, here is what changes. Next time you hear about invasive species, ask one question: what native predator used to live here? Look at what we have walked through. Carp arrived in an already emptied ecosystem where their suppressors had been eliminated. Ecological vacancy. That is the condition carp exploited. Now you know it. You see it in every river story. I want to hear from you, in your home water, whatever that is. What native predator has vanished that used to keep balance? I read every single comment you leave. Tell me what you find.